Hi, this is John Florian from VoiceOver Extra, and you are listening to the VoiceOver Marketing Podcast with John Amelli.
This is the VoiceOver Marketing Podcast, episode number 51. This episode of the VoiceOver Marketing Podcast is sponsored by thevoiceoverathlete.com and the book Voice Over Legal by Rob Siglampaglia. You don't think you need this book? Here's a question for you. Have you ever been asked to do a celebrity impression for a commercial? If you have, you might want to think twice, unless you live in a particular state. You can find out why impersonations can be a problem and why you could get sued if you do one, and which state is exempt from all of that on page 28 of the VoiceOver Legal book. Now, we've arranged a discount for you to save up to $5. That's up to 20% off the list price of the book, and you can support the podcast at the same time. If you're a voice artist and you're treating your business as a business, you need this book. Just go to voiceoverlegal.com. When you go to voiceoverlegal.com, enter the promo code VMP at checkout to save $5 off the cost of the book. That's promo code V as in voice, M as in marketing, and P as in podcast at checkout to save $5 off the cost of the book, and you'll support the podcast at the same time. Thanks. Hey there, it's John. Thanks for spending some time with me today. I do appreciate it. How are you? Thank you very much for all of your kind comments on episode 50 when my lovely bride, Anne, interviewed me. She turned the tables on me and interviewed me. And I have to admit to you one thing. One of the questions she asked me was, if I could eat anything I wanted with impunity, I wouldn't get sick, I wouldn't get, heart disease or high blood pressure or anything like that. If I could eat anything, and she let me pick for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, the answer I gave her for lunch was I'd have a hot dog for lunch every day if I could eat one. I have to tell you the truth. I had a hot dog today for lunch. I haven't had a hot dog in about a year. Can I change my request? I really don't want a hot dog. Not the best choice for a meal. I don't think I'll be having another one of those anytime soon. Anyway, we've had a lot of downloads of that last episode and a lot of fun comments from people about when Anne turned the tables on me. So thank you. There have been 421 downloads of that episode alone in the last week, so that's pretty cool. And statistically speaking, we have had, as of this recording, 56,423 downloads of the various and sundry episodes of the VoiceOver Marketing Podcast. So thank you. And thanks for everybody who's listening for the first time. Welcome to the show. And also, just another stat, we are 5 members away from reaching 1,000 members of the VoiceOver Marketing Podcast group on Facebook. So this is fun. We have some momentum, and I appreciate all your support. Even put a survey out to the group earlier this week asking what day of the week is easiest for you to listen to new episodes of the podcast. And by far, the top answer is doesn't matter. Other options were Wednesday, Friday, or Thursday. So far, the only votes are for it doesn't matter. If there is a particular day that you like to listen to new podcasts or more likely to listen to a podcast, feel free to weigh in at the VoiceOver Marketing Podcast group on Facebook. If you're not a member of that, feel free to ping me, let me know. I do look at all the people who request. I look at your profile to make sure that you've got some interest, at least an interest in voiceover or the performing arts or audio production in some way, shape, or form. If you don't, I'll just shoot you a quick message, say, hey, are you in voiceover or are you thinking about voiceover or whatever? I want to have people who are involved in voiceover so that we don't get spammed with a lot of nonsense. I've had to kick some people out because they've posted. We don't have too much of a problem, and I'm kind of going off topic here, but every once in a while we'll get somebody who wants to just hammer away at some weird cause, and I don't know why they choose this forum to express their opinions about, I don't know, Australian fire ants. Just making that up off the top of my head. What Australian fire ants has to do with the voiceover marketing podcast? I don't know. I really just made that up. If there are Australian fire ants out there listening to the podcast and you're the least bit offended, I'm sorry. Watch out. We'll be sending an anteater your way. We don't have time for your complaints. Anyway, my guest today for this episode of the podcast, it's been a long week. My guest today for this episode of the podcast is Erik Reynolds. And in this episode, you're going to learn how Erik has, as we call them later in the podcast, we define them as the rules of engagement. Erik's done an excellent job of defining his ideal customer, and it's come after some trial and error, some hard lessons learned. We share some stories about that. We also learn that Erik will turn down business that goes against his principles and his, as we've called them, rules of engagement. And he also shares a really neat resource toward the end of our interview about a rate guide, and we have links to all of this good stuff posted in the show notes of this episode. I really enjoyed my conversation with Erik. And thanks to Mike Broderick for suggesting that we interview Erik. Mike, thank you. I hope all is well with you. For you, I'm sorry that the Red Sox didn't do better in the playoffs. So that's it for another season, and Big Papi's off to retirement. So anyway, Mike, you know what I'm talking about. Other folks don't know what I'm talking about. But anyway, thanks again, Mike. Appreciate your participation in the group as always. So some really good stuff for this interview. Make sure you listen. If you've got a notepad and pencil, pen, crayon, other writing utensil, maybe a quill with an inkwell, feel free to take notes. I'm in rare form, so maybe I'll just be quiet now and just segue right into our conversation with Erik Reynolds. Enjoy. I'll catch you at the end of the episode. Well, welcome back. As I mentioned in the first part of the program, my guest today is Erik Reynolds. And Erik, you were recommended as part of the Facebook survey for someone to be a guest on the program because of some of the marketing techniques that you do. So thanks for being on the program today.
John, it's great to be here, and I'm either excited or sorry that I pulled the wool over somebody's eyes, but it's flattering to be recommended, and hopefully it can be helpful to somebody.
Yeah, that's great. Just to let everybody know a little bit about Erik's background, he's been using the microphone to communicate on stage, on the air, and in the booth for more than 20 years. And in addition to being a full-time voiceover talent, he's also a professional musician, and he currently serves as the music director in residence at, correct me if I get this incorrect, Vive les Arts Theater in Killeen, Texas. Is that correct?
That's probably the best I've ever heard it said, to be honest.
Viva les Arts. Anyway, Theatre.
Yes, Texas, so of course we butcher it down here.
Some of your VO credits include Hitachi, 3M, BASF, Qualcomm, Samsung, HP, Subaru, Goodwill Industries, and many more. So, like I said before, thanks for being on the program today.
John, it's great to be with you. I'm really excited to have a conversation.
Yeah. So tell us your story. People are always curious as to how voiceover actors get started in voiceover. Tell us that journey for you.
Well, for me, it started many, many moons ago. As far as the voiceover side of things, it was through a relationship with a really good friend of mine at church. He runs the sales department at our local ABC television affiliate.
Oh, okay.
And so we would, be in church choir together. And this one day, he kind of came up to me. He's like, "Hey, I've got a project I think you'd really work well on." And again, this is back in the 90s. And I had no idea what voiceover was. It was kind of one of those things where he brought me in to record a commercial for him. Mm-hmm. I didn't even know it was called voiceover. And it was just a lot of fun. And I got a chance to do that a couple of times with him and then some of his colleagues over the years, and it really just piqued my interest. So started doing research on it and learning more about it, and it wasn't until 2007 where I started really looking at I really looked at this could be something for that career that I've always wanted to own my own business and do my own thing, not always work for somebody.
Mm-hmm.
And so I started doing the research and, buying books. And back in, of course, 2007 is really around the time when just online really started to explode as far as being a marketplace. And so I got some books. I got the Elaine Clark book, There's Money Where Your Mouth Is, and just a bunch of other ones too, Harlan Hogan's books and things like that, and did research. And it was around then also where I started, and another thing that I still do to this day is I'm also a public address announcer here in my hometown.
Oh.
And so for high school football and basketball, I announce games. I've been doing that for 10 years.
Okay.
Yeah, and so I was doing that, and I was doing this research, and then at one of the games, a parent came to me after the game and said, "Hey, how much do you charge to do this?" I was like, "Well, I volunteer here. This is my high school alma mater. I just volunteer to help." And they're like, "Well, you mean you don't want to get paid to do this?" I was like, I never thought about, because I'd had a little bit with my friend who at the station, but I never considered, wait, this is actually happening. This could actually happen. And so I did a little project for this lady. She owned her own law firm, and she needed somebody to do a phone system reporting for her. And so from then, it was I talked to my boss at the time, and I was like, hey, I don't want you to think I'm leaving you per se, but we talked, and I had talked with him before. I worked at the church where I had met my friend, and it's a really great relationship with him. I was like, this is something I'm thinking about. What do you think? He's like, hey, I think you should go for it. So this was 2012. This was actually Thanksgiving of 2012. And that's when I was like, okay, we're going to do this. We're going to do this. And I started working towards moving to full-time. And it was a year later when I actually moved from working 2 full-time jobs, which was working at the church during the day and working at voiceover at night, to where I was just doing voiceover during the day. And, of course, that doesn't mention at all the music directing. That's all in the evenings.
Yeah.
It's a volunteer theater, and I do that. And it is compensated. And then also in the evenings, of course, you get to call high school football and basketball, which in Texas is just by far one of the most fun things in the world you can do.
There's so much that you shared in that story that I just want to pull from for a second. First of all, you did your research, and that echoes a lot of what Kelly Carruthers-Buttrick shared in her interview a couple of, maybe 2-3 episodes ago. She did a lot of research. You did research. You've invested in your career. You bought books. You've done training, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Worked with coaches. And you've attacked different genres of voiceover. You do PA announcing, you're calling sports games, you're doing music. You're fully involved in doing what you want to do, but it didn't happen easily. You were working 2 full-time jobs, and I just admire the grit and the gutting it out and making it happen. Now, I just think that's important for people to understand, is that it doesn't just happen, that if you really, really want it, you have to put the time in. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, and I appreciate it. I say that I started in 2012. Really, I started in 2007. It was in 2012 when I started working towards the very specifics of how to make the business work and how to land clients and things of that nature. That's when I first got my first coach and was doing things along those lines. So it's, for me to start in 2013 full-time, it really started back in 2007 for me.
Yeah, and I think you'll find that that's the case for most folks, is that they, it's very, very rare when someone just comes directly into voiceover. They don't come out of school and become a voiceover talent 99% of the time.
Right.
It usually takes a bit of a journey. It took me about 10 years after I got out of college to when I got my first full-time radio gig, and there were plenty of steps along the way there, but there was always the eye on that goal, and you did what you had to do to get to where you wanted to be.
Yeah, and John, it's even having all the years from 2007 to 2012 before I really began to develop the business side of things. It doesn't mean that since 2012 until now, in late 2000 or mid to late 2016, it's been easy. It's still a lot of hard work. I mean, there's no overnight success story here. I know. I was talking to a colleague. We were having a conversation about marketing, and they had brought that up. Like, man, it just seems like they're just like all of a sudden everything just exploded for you. I was like, well, that's cute, but gosh, please don't discount the 7 years of
Right.
of work that I put in ahead of time to make sure that I was prepared when the client finally said yes, or when the door actually opened and when the opportunity presented itself. I was just prepared, and I've worked really, really hard to be there.
That's so key. I mean, I frequently say luck is when preparedness meets opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you're right. It's not an overnight success. One of the reasons why your name came up as someone who they wanted to be as a guest on this podcast was of your marketing and your direct mail marketing. And just before the interview, we were chatting, getting set up for the conversation. And you said, yeah, you do a lot of email marketing and you do stuff on LinkedIn. Are there some things that you can share with us about how you approach email? Because I frequently get asked about email, whether or not they should attach a demo to the email. Should they do it cold? How do they avoid being spammed or spamming other people and stuff like that? What's your philosophy behind email marketing? And how do you go about it?
Well, my philosophy behind it is really with anything. And before I say anything else, it's not that I don't believe in other types of marketing, or I don't think that a lot of social media or direct or cold calling, I'm sure they work well. I just found what really works well for me, and I've really worked hard to make sure that I've put a system together for myself that provides results. But as far as my email marketing, the idea is to really make it about the potential client more so than about me.
Okay. What do you mean by that, Eric?
I think what happens a lot of times with the voiceover talent is, well, first of all, I don't think that enough research generally goes into a client. I think what happens is they'll look up, say, if they're wanting to work with video producers, they'll kind of do a Google search or a search on certain trade websites for video producers, and then it's just this blast, as many people as possible that I can get my demo into their email box. And, hi, my name is Erik, and this is what I do, and these are the credits I have, and this is the demo that I have, and please hire me.
Yeah.
Well, you imagine that somebody that's receiving that, or at least I do, they're probably in the same position I am, and that they've got this passion project that is their business. Or even if it's that they own it, it's the creative industry, so there's passion behind it. I think the last thing that they really want is for somebody to just flood them with a me message. So what I do is I research my clients or the potential clients as much as I possibly can. And that's really where LinkedIn comes in on the professional side.
Okay.
People go there to put as much information about themselves and their passion in their business, their passion in their career. They put it on LinkedIn. And more so than, like, Facebook's more personal. Twitter is super short. You can get 40-something characters, but there's not a lot of depth there. And
I was just going to say that same thing there, yeah.
Yeah, well, and what the great thing with LinkedIn is you can look at somebody's entire span of their career and really get a sense for who they are. They'll post things. They'll post links to projects they've worked on, and you can kind of get a sense of what really matters to them. So when I reach out to a client, I'd like to think I have a pretty good sense of what's important to them, and that I can approach it from the place of, I'm going to come along and not fix your problems because you're already doing that. I'm going to come along and be a partner in the process for you. If you're doing a e-learning project, or if you're you're working on a commercial, or you have your own creative agency in the basement of your home, how wonderful is it if somebody can come along and say, I'm not here to badger you about anything, but if you've got something that you're passionate about, I can apply my passion to it as well, and we can really do some great things, number one. Number two, just like we are as voiceovers, these people are isolated in their homes a lot. They're isolated in their basement or in that spare bedroom, and they're sitting at the computer, and they don't get to share about their projects a lot. Like for myself, just as a little aside, my wife is a teacher. So I'm at home all day, and I'm recording. I'm in my booth. I'm talking to myself. I mean, gosh, I'm probably going to talk way too much in this call because I don't usually get to talk to other humans. The dog is tired of hearing me talk to him. Well, my wife comes home. She teaches fourth grade. She's got 40, or so students that she'll interact with during the day for 6, 7, 8 hours, and all the teachers and all these people, she's done talking mid to late.
Sure.
So I really don't get to share a lot with my family about kind of how my day went because they're done by the time they get home in the afternoons.
Yeah.
But how wonderful is it that, when I have interactions with a client, I can ask them about them, ask them about their projects, ask them about their, hey, I love what you did. How did you approach that? What did you use? That seems really interesting. And so I said that to say the long way around of I really approach it from my marketing, from getting to know the client and letting them know that this conversation is not going to be about me. This relationship is not going to be about me and my desire for you to hire me, which ultimately I do want you to. Mm-hmm. But I want you to know somebody gets it. I get that you're passionate about this. I get that you've put all this investment and this time and money and energy and blood and sweat and tears. And first, let me congratulate you. Second, let me tell you how wonderful I think what you did was, and genuinely. And third, if there's a chance that I can apply my passion to what you're doing, then that's just a win-win all the way around. So that's kind of the long way of saying the approach, the philosophical approach I have to my marketing.
That makes sense, and I think that's smart. It's warm marketing. So to step back from that, how do you initiate the conversation?
Well, generally, after the research, and I know who it is I want to talk to and who it is I'm planning on reaching out to, I generally send a welcome email, and I've kind of got like templates that I use, but I don't just copy and paste. First, I just thank them for receiving the email, and then whatever the reason that I'm approaching them for. For instance, if it's a video production company and I was on their website and they had some YouTube videos of their works, I just tell them, hey, I think what you posted was really great. And then I'll put a conversation together with that or initiate a conversation based on the content that they're working on. And so that's generally how I start. I don't really mention what I do outside of my email signature at first. I want them to, basically I just want to give them a kudos and a pat on the back.
You want to compliment them, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I start with a compliment. That's a business principle, I know, but that's how I start.
That's great. I mean, who doesn't like a compliment?
Exactly.
Let me ask you a question now. Do you look for projects in areas that you have an interest in?
Yes, in short. One of the things when I was getting started is I told myself from the very beginning, I don't want to get stuck doing projects just because that's the only projects that are available to me. And then it's no different to me than I should stay at my day job if that's the case.
Yeah, okay.
I only wanted to work on things that I wanted to work on and things that I was passionate about. And what really helps with that is it really narrows down the field of what I'm looking for people to connect with. I don't have to connect with everybody that fits a certain database criteria. I get to actually do research and learn about the company and learn about the people at the company. And basically when I get comfortable saying, yeah, that's somebody I think I'd like to work with, then that's when the conversation starts for me.
That's so cool. So you're defining your customer.
Yeah, and defining it as for instance, for me, I don't just want to work with video production companies. Very specifically, I want to work with companies in small to mid markets. I want to work with companies that I know if there's like a family atmosphere, like maybe it's a wife and husband together, or if it's somebody that's like us or like me, they've started their own business, they're working out of their garage, maybe they have a couple other jobs, but that's the kind of atmosphere that I want to work in. And sometimes it keeps you, I guess the idea is that it could keep you from the big companies, and I don't mind working with big companies, and there's a story there as well, but man, that really excites me, is to be able to send that first email to a guy that I know he's also in his extra room in his house. And I know he's also been building this from the ground up for, X number of years, and hopefully he's excited. And generally, it's always been received very warmly when I do email and say, hey, that project that you posted on YouTube a week ago or a day ago, great job. They're generally excited to get those messages.
You wouldn't be. Yeah, I mean, if it's their baby, you hit it right on the head. It's like you bring a voice to the projects that they're passionate about. You're helping them achieve their goal. And I think that's really cool. And,
John, I think what I found, and I've really been able to build a really solid client list and a group of clients, which really I call partners instead of calling clients.
I got that sense from the way you were talking about it because of the mindset of the people that you're approaching. I wanted to say that. You basically become a partner with them in their creative process.
I really do. And what happens with partnerships is I get called into the project a lot earlier than I would if I'm just a voice for hire. Not only that, when they start working on the project and beginning to think creatively, I found that a lot of times if they have a partner, somebody they know they can share in the excitement and passion with, they start from the beginning thinking about the project in my voice.
Aha. Okay.
And so the creative process of when we get to the session, it goes a lot smoother because they're already considering what it would sound like in my voice versus me being a voice for hire. And then you have to go through the first portion of the session where you're like, well, try it like this. Well, try it like that. Well, what about this? And can you do this? Morgan Freeman, all this kind of things. That's already been worked out in the back of their mind because I've been with them from the beginning of the project. They already start thinking in my voice.
That's interesting. And then there's the backstory for you. The flip side of that, or maybe that runs along with it, I don't know how to describe that, but basically you've seen it earlier on in the project, so you know, aside from them hearing it in your voice, you're also hearing how they're approaching this project and the dynamic and the goal that they have in mind. You're along for the ride for that part of the journey in the development process, if you will. And so you know the backstory on the project and their ultimate goal. So you have a sense of what they want to accomplish as you approach the copy. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, absolutely. Not only that, but if you've really done research even before the relationship started, you kind of get a sense of who they are and how they approach their sphere in the creative world, and be it a creative director or an e-learning developer or a video production person. You really kind of have a sense of how they approach this, and kind of, not that people get stuck in a rut, but you get a sense of somebody's creative style.
Yep.
And so there's already kind of a relationship there that makes that process instead of a difficult back and forth trying to find the right voice. Like I said, it's almost like a dance at that point of, let's see what we can create. Let's see what we can accomplish together versus, oh my gosh, are you ever going to get this voice right?
Yeah, I mean, if you talk about building in repeat business, if they're starting to write with you in mind, it's so much better to work with a client that you've already got than to try and chase new business all the time.
Well, and over 75% of my business each month is repeat business. And one of the great things about focusing on the smaller companies and the more mom and pop or the I'm in my garage starting this thing up is I've had several conversations at this point with where I've reached out and say a production company about a partnership. And like, well, we've never worked with a voiceover before. How would that even work is the response I get. Okay. Especially when you're talking about small markets or smaller companies. Well, and then I get to help them through that process of, well, this is, I've been doing this for a while. This is how the process would work. This is how you include voiceover. This is how you increase your value in your market by having professional voices. Here's other voices I can introduce you to because, of course, I'm not the only voice you'll ever want to use on projects. So from a business standpoint, that's great that they consider you all the time when you're doing it. But really on just a professional and a personal level, it's great to see somebody get that aha moment that takes them to the next level in their production.
Interesting. You've talked about, you've married the concepts of LinkedIn and email. And we've talked about how you approach these folks. Can you define your client a little bit more? I mean, I'm really impressed by that in that Dan Kennedy, who's a marketing expert and somebody I've studied and learned from for many years, he gave this talk once and he said, the worst thing is having a success that you don't want. And that, if you know what I'm saying, it's like, it's like you're working with clients that you're kind of like, yeah. It's so much more fun to work on projects that intrigue you. So how did you come up with your ideal client?
Well, and I think I mentioned it before, for whatever reason for me, it's the Thanksgiving break. There's generally that week where the kids are off and sometimes my family will travel. That's when I generally start my business plan and marketing plan for the next year is during that Thanksgiving break. I haven't always been this focused as far as my ideal client. It was Thanksgiving last year, 2015, where I really said, you know what, the reason it came about was because I had a really bad experience with a really just awful human being of a client. And I broke all my own rules. When I first got started, I was not going to work with people that I thought didn't have just a character or things like that I wanted to work with. And a project came up, and I was recommended to another client, and the money was good, and so I broke my own rules. And I get to the end of the project, and I was just miserable after about 3 weeks of working with this client. And so that's when I sat down and was like, okay, let me define exactly who it is I want to work with, the exact genres, but also the type of person that I want to work with. And so literally, it's in my office. I'm sitting here now. I have 2 whiteboards. One of the whiteboards, at the top half of it, is just the definition of those 4 clients that I want to work with, the genres that they're in, but the type of people as well. And so what that does for me is the genres are extremely narrow, so it makes searching for them a lot easier, for me at least. And then the type of person is also, it's not so much narrow, it's just I know what I'm looking for. I guess I can share it with you. But
feel free to share as much as you're comfortable with, Erik.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, you've worked hard to develop this for your business, so we don't want you to give away the store. But I mean, just broad parameters or whatever you're comfortable sharing.
Sure. Well, and I've said it many times. It's a partner. There was 4 P's, I call them. It's a partner. They have to be passionate about what they're doing. It has to be professional. And there has to be a level of performance involved. And I use performance because a majority of my work is e-learning, but I really don't like doing the very dry, just mundane, boring, robotic e-learning. And some people ask for that. Okay. And it doesn't excite me. So the clients I want them to, there's a level of, not that the voice takes over and overshadows the actual content, but allows me to use my skill set that I've worked very hard for or very hard on to help the project be the best that it can be. So it's partner, it's passionate, it's professional, and it's performer is what I'm looking for in my clients.
So you get to bring some performance aspect, a part of you into the copy.
Yes.
You mean that?
Instead of being so robotic that it's indescript. You could have just used Siri. And she's been wonderful. I love her. Yeah. She's a wonderful human being. We share an agent, but I don't want to seem so automated that there was no human behind it.
I understand what you're saying, yeah. So you've got the 4 Ps, and it's so cool that you can categorize that. You mentioned rules, and you broke your own rules. Could you share one of the rules with us?
Absolutely, and it goes back to my previous job before voiceover. I absolutely loved the work that I did, the people I worked with. For the most part, there was every now and then, any office, somebody comes along that just makes it more difficult to get up in the morning, and just go for it. And that was the one rule in my last 2 years at my previous job. It was really difficult. There's some really, really difficult people that had been hired, and my boss at the time, one of the most compassionate people I've ever met in my life, and he would just want to give chance after chance. Let's not throw them out. Let's see if we can redeem this. But it made it so difficult to work. And as I'm leaving, I was like, you know what? I'm glad that he has that, and I'd like to think I do too. But I'm not going to spend my 8 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours a day having to deal with people that just make it to where you just I don't want to do this today.
Drain your energy, yeah.
Yeah, and so that was my primary rule is I want to work with people I want to work with. And that was the rule I broke when I first started having the conversation with the difficult client I was telling you about. It just, all the red flags went up. Every red flag went up. But I saw the dollar signs, and I'm thinking, wow, my kids are going to get to eat this month. Yeah, let's do that,
Yeah, sure.
And so I broke the rule, and ultimately, like I said, it was nothing but a drain. And, of course, you get to these difficult people. Of course, invoicing is difficult. Yeah. And collecting everything is just difficult. Everything is difficult. So I broke all the rules, and shame on me for doing that.
Well, you learned from it. You basically reaffirmed your rules. You were like, the money's there and all that, but then it's like they don't just stop being difficult once you've sent the voice files.
Exactly.
It's everything about it. I've found the similar thing in terms of setting up rules for payment on projects. Like you get, a 50% deposit or things of that nature where you set up a system for yourself on how you want to do business. And I've had similar lessons where it's like somebody says, hey, can I, instead of the 50%, can I give you 30% now and pay it in thirds? And whenever you break that rule for yourself and you cut somebody a break or you try and work with them on something, it turns into a thing. And like you said, it is a flag. And 99% of the time, you just know it's going to be this thing. Perfect example is like this guy said, hey, I want to do this project, but can I do it in thirds? And it was a referral from a colleague of mine, and I said, okay. So I said, sure, that's fine. And then it was like maybe 3 or 4 weeks later, hey, can I get my deposit back because I've decided, and you'd already set up the project file and, you've already invested time in the project.
Yeah.
And they just want all of it back. And you're like, well, we've spent time here already. And then it just turns into this thing. And then it's like, you know what? I should have said no. And if I would have wound up with the same result with less hassle. I didn't get that client. They wanted their money back. And I've had to, wrangle and make accommodations and all that kind of stuff. So you're absolutely right. When you set up rules for yourself, my wife Ann and I talk about this stuff. I call them the rules of engagement.
I like that. I'm going to steal that one.
Okay. And it's like when you set things up for yourself and then you deviate from it, you're absolutely right. You should be true to your rules because you set them up for a reason. There was something about the reason why you set that rule for yourself, and that helps you define who you want to work with, doesn't it?
Well, it does, and it really helps you define yourself and how you want to be received and perceived as a professional as well. The only situations where I ever have broken the rule and it's not backfired is where the client has been a one of the major Fortune 500 companies that has a system in place already that actually ultimately works out better for me. Like their system is more organized and prepared than mine is.
Okay.
But that's the only time is, for instance, say a Hitachi, they're not going anywhere tomorrow. They're not about to run off and change their name and, change their phone number, set up the email address thing on me. And not that's, I have an issue with them, but just as an example, that's one of the e-learning clients that I get a chance to work with. And they have a different system, but their system works better. Actually, it's they pay better than standard, and I don't want to put too much out there about them.
No, that's fine. That's fine.
They get bombarded with calls and emails, but please don't call it Hitachi.
They wouldn't know how to get there. They wouldn't know who to call.
They really wouldn't. It's such a huge company. It's thousands of employees, and I work very specifically with a very specific team, and it's a wonderful relationship. Actually, the first e-learning company that I ever landed a job with, and we're still together to this day. It's a wonderful, wonderful relationship. But again, as a Fortune 500 company, they already had their system in place, and so I can respect that.
Sure.
Versus, not that it's a disrespect for other companies or smaller companies, especially we're working with smaller companies. It's just I have a system in place. It's worked for me. It's always backfired if I don't stick to my system and stick to my plan or my rules of engagement that I'm calling it now.
Yeah.
And so there's no need to deviate. And again, it keeps the pool small. And in this great big ocean of potential clients and potential problems, the more defined, the more structured, the more purposeful we are, it gets that smaller, and smaller is absolutely better. On every level there's no need for me to try to reach out to all 79,000 video production companies in the United States.
Yeah.
I need that list to be small. I need to be very focused and very intentional on the people that I'm trying to develop relationships and partnerships with and that I want to work with.
That's key. So everything that I'm hearing from you is like you've avoided what I call the voice-over commodity marketplace, where they're the pay-to-play sites, if you will.
I have accounts on the pay-to-play site, but again, talking about setting up rules, when I first started doing research and finding out about the pay-to-play sites, what I didn't like was, and this is before, I know now there's a lot of stuff coming out about just, improper treatment of the voice talent.
Sure, yeah.
And how they process payments. But before that, I just didn't want to have to chase an audition. I didn't want to have to drop everything I'm doing, working with a client, or, I'm very structured. I'm very much a schedule guy. I didn't want to have to stop everything I'm doing to run an audition out in 90 seconds, and I've not spent any time researching or considering the script. I'm just banging words out my mouth as fast as I possibly can to get it in, because it has to be one of the first ones.
Right.
And I know people do that real successfully, and they've created careers, and that's great. That's just not how I work. It doesn't work for me.
It's not part of your rule.
Exactly. It broke my rule, and so. I've landed clients through the two major, but it's always been through private auditions.
Mm-hmm.
And
same here.
Yeah, and I've had I had a paid subscription to both of them, and it broke my rules to have to play that game. Yep. And I know at some point I'll have to figure it out. I know the pay-to-play thing is here to stay. I know it's going to be the primary workspace to an extent, but today I'm okay without it.
Yeah, so you've defined your own little thing. Yeah, I mean, I don't mean little in a bad sense or to diminish it in any
absolutely.
way.
The smaller the better.
Perhaps a rhetorical question, but I probably know the answer to this thing, but do you ever turn down business?
Yes, I do. And that's a hard one. I think for a lot of talent it is, because, I don't want to seem ungrateful, or I don't want to seem like I'm somebody that's arrived, and by no means am I any type of perfect talent, but and I know this is a PG or rated G podcast, but I got a script one time. It was a recommendation. Another client had somebody that sent me a script, and I remember my wife was sitting there with me. It was during the summer. She was off. She just happened to be in my office with me when the script came in. Mm-hmm. And I started reading out loud just as it came in. I was like, for this audition, and they put the price right in the top of the email, what they're offering, and we're like, yeah, that'd be great vacation, Yeah. And so I start reading the script, and I get in, and these obscenities and this very vulgar and very demeaning to women language comes out of this sales script, is what it was. And I just as I was reading, I wasn't just cold reading. And she was like, Erik, I'm like, I'm sorry, I didn't read this. This is not me. Please don't leave me. Yeah. And so it was one of those things where I have a wife. I have 4 daughters. My first and foremost is I don't want them to ever have to hear my voice saying something that they wouldn't be proud of. So that's first. That's my first rule. I don't really have political rules as far as work I turn down. I'm getting more to the point to where I'm turning down work that isn't paying well. But that was a hard lesson for me, because a small town guy that I'm not part of the major industries. I didn't know what a good rate was for the longest time, even with all the research I did. And I'm a researcher. Mm-hmm. I just didn't know what a good rate was. I think one of the greatest resources we've seen in years, and maybe one of the top 10 of all time, is the GVAA rate guide that they've come out with recently.
Oh, okay.
It has absolutely been one of the greatest resources, because for a guy like me that's in small town Texas, when I first started looking at going full time, my sphere was what I'd already been making in our local area. And just so you know, the local commercial area, if for radio or television, 30 seconds was $30, 60 seconds was $50. I didn't know that wasn't good. I had no other I had no other influence.
Right.
And then when I start looking online, I see the pay to play. One of them had $100 minimum. My head just exploded. I was like, baby, we're going to be so rich. One of those things, when you see that. And still didn't know that wasn't a fair compensation. And just over the years, I thought, oh, man, that wasn't fair, and I got better. And then the next year, oh, that's not fair, and I got better. It's just so great to have a rate guide now. It's really kind of a universal, wonderful for non-union talent. I'm non-union.
Okay.
It's great to have that as a resource that new talent, I send them to it all the time. It's like, please don't make the mistakes that so many of us have made, mostly because of ignorance. We just didn't know any better.
Right. For work that's outside the, not covered by the SAG-AFTRA contract, I am a member of SAG-AFTRA, and I've counseled other people on this as well. It's like, okay, come up with a gut price, like what's the first thing that pops into your head, and then add 30% onto it.
Yeah,
and then
that's a great idea.
Yeah, and throw that number out there. And I've had it happen where you give that number, And they go, okay. And you're like, wow, I'm glad I asked for that, but I'm also kind of bummed out that I didn't ask for more.
Exactly. Well, and then even because that was kind of, I wasn't the exactly what you were doing, but I was kind of going with my gut a lot. Is there were so many different rate guides out there for the non-union guys, and they were so varied. I mean, just both ends of the spectrum.
Yeah.
So I was just kind of like, well, $300? I mean, like I'm asking them a question, versus being confident in what I'm and what I'm quoting.
Yeah.
And now when I do quote, first of all, I've also developed a relationship, and there's a partnership, so there's a respect that my clients have for me as well. So I really avoid people that are intending to disrespect me with the rates. I really don't have that come across any longer. I quote them. They know that I respect them, and that I know that they respect me. So even if it's like, wow, that was more than I was expecting, they kind of many times will go to the drawing board or go back to their clients and say, hey, I underquoted you on voice talent. I didn't know that this was a fair compensation for voice talent versus, well, it'll be great exposure or, those conversations.
Yeah. This could lead to future jobs down the road.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Oh, we'll keep you so busy. We've all heard that.
Yeah.
And,
you'll be heard everywhere. Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah.
I won't be there to hear it there.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's funny. So this has been a great conversation. I have one last question, if I could.
Yeah.
Because this is something that I'm always curious about, and I just started asking it in interviews that I'm doing. What's your morning routine, if you're comfortable sharing it with us?
Oh, yeah. Again, I'm a father of four, wife and four daughters. And so my morning starts at 5 a.m., and this is recently my second oldest plays volleyball in the school. My oldest is a high school cheerleader. She's in her senior year of high school.
Wow.
And both of those practices are in the mornings. Thankfully, my oldest, she drives, so she can drive herself. But my second oldest, she does not. She's in middle school in 7th grade. And so her practices start at 6 a.m. every morning. So I get up at 5, and we leave the house about 5:30 in the morning. Well, that's different from 3 months ago, where I don't really start my work until 8 a.m. And everybody was sleep in the house anyway because it was summer. So I'm in the process of reworking it. I would do some exercise in the evenings with my wife. She's so committed to healthy eating and a healthy living and an exercise lifestyle. She works out every day. I try to make sure I do it 3 times a week and then ask God to forgive me for not doing it.
Okay.
Yeah. So right now I wake up at 5, get the daughter out the door by 5:30, usually back about 6:30, and then I try to get some kind of exercise or workout or morning routine. I always have a cup of tea every morning. I don't drink coffee.
Okay.
I do either green tea or there's a black tea with lemon that I drink. And my work as far as voiceover starts probably around 7:30 or so. And that's generally more of the marketing, the business. It's the checking the emails, the invoicing, things like that I do early. And I start recording, just depends on what the day is, around 9 a.m. or so. And then I audition. So I record work in the morning, and I do auditions in the afternoon.
Okay.
So I try to be done by 4 p.m. Because that's when my kids come home and my wife comes home.
That's great. And then you've got the rest of the day for the family stuff, which is the most important stuff.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. Well, Erik, you've shared a lot of great information. If people want to reach out to you or connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Oh, best way is probably through email or through the website. I mean, I love connecting via social media, but all that information is there on the website.
Okay.
And I'll have a lot of people that will contact me just kind of wanting consultation with the marketing, the email marketing, the creating the relationships kind of the way that I do. And I love having those conversations as well. And we can definitely set up time to do that. My website is www.erikaudio.com.
And is that Erik with a K?
Erik with a K. My parents did me a wonderful favor by giving me an Erik with a K.
That was a leading question because I have your web address right here in front of me, and I have a brother, Erik, and he's got a C. So I just thought, you know what?
Well, most people in the United States do. I was born in Germany. My dad's military, so I was born overseas, and I think just they thought it'd be super creative, we're overseas, we're European, he's going to have dual citizenship. Let's give him a K. Yeah, thanks, Mom. I can never have those vintage or the gift type of, wristbands and keychains. They're never there with the K.
Yeah, like the coffee cup with everybody's name on it. Yeah, there's no Erik with the K.
Oh, it's great. But, so anyway, it's ericaudio.com. And all my social media is there. Skype. I love chatting on Skype, or send me an email. Like I said, I love talking about marketing, and if I can be helpful to anybody, I'd love to be helpful.
That's great. One last question. If there's one thing you want people to take away from our conversation today, what would that be?
The main thing is really do your research. Whether or not you have a system like mine, where it's partner-based or email-based, or if you like to doing cold calling or using social media, whatever it is, just really, really do research on the people you're working with, you want to work with, and on what makes your system work for you. Whether you call that a business plan or a marketing plan or just jotting down ideas, have a system and then work that system. And if it doesn't work the first day, just stay with it. If you continue, if you stay with it, you stay faithful to it, you'll see great results.
That's fantastic. Erik, thank you so much.
Jonathan, great chatting with you. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks again to Erik Reynolds for his time in being a guest on the show. I really appreciate that, Erik. Great content. Great rules of engagement as well. And be sure to check out that rate guide. We have a link to that in the show notes for this episode 51 of the Voice Over Marketing Podcast. You can get that at voiceovermarketingpodcast.com and just click on episode 51. You'll see that at the top of the feed for this episode. My guest next week is David Lasauskas, and Dave is known as the mobile voiceover talent. He is on the road, and we have quite a story to share with you. If you are wondering if you can make it in voiceover, this guy does it on the road. So be sure to tune in next week for my conversation with David Lasauskas. And after that, we've got Bill DeWeese coming up on the Voiceover Marketing Podcast. Lots of good stuff. So that's it for this week, and I'll talk to you next week. Uncle Frank, why don't you wrap this up for us?
Our program originates in the Boston studios. We hope you'll join us again. Until then, we bid you au revoir, keep your chin up, and the best of luck.
Well, that's it for this episode of the Voice Over Marketing Podcast. If you like this podcast, please subscribe to it at voiceovermarketingpodcast.com so you'll get notices of new episodes. And please share it with your friends and colleagues in the voiceover world. Also, it would be a huge help if you'd like this podcast and rate it on iTunes to help keep it near the top of the list. Feel free to share your comments and questions about this episode and future topics you'd like discussed at voiceovermarketingpodcast.com. And if you'd like more information on one-on-one coaching where we focus on growing your business, feel free to drop me a line at my cyber assistant's email address at mike@johnmelly.com. Thanks for listening. Now go out there and share your voice with the world.